very, very happy that I'm included today in this Q&A session.
Excellent.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Yes. Bob, I'm just going to I know we've been waiting for the main event, really. I'm just going to quickly, if you don't mind, just show people, can everybody see that slide of all the achievements of Bob Emiliani? Can everybody see that? Yeah. Professor at Central Connecticut State University. He originated the study of lean leadership, the concept of lean leadership. 25 years of research in lean leadership, 15 years industry work experience. The author of 22 books and 45 papers. Look on Amazon.com or your bookseller of choice and look at all of the wonderful books that Professor Bob has written, and they're very, very clear, easy to read, to the point. A plug for one of his most recent books there, the Triumph of Classical Management over Lean Management, which is fascinating. And the book that I started with, that he published, I really like this one. I've got a question about this one for him, which he republished actually. It wasn't, but he did the forward in that book. 18 years executive training, creator of Speed Leadership. Very, very interesting concept there that Bob created. And the pedagogy, lean teaching, so lean education, the whole idea of making education more efficient. And his website there is bobemiliani.com, and his blog is on there. Bob, you have a wonderful blog that you adding to almost every day, or at least every week, it seems. You're writing something new. Yeah.
Bad habit.
Yeah. Some of your articles, you've written at least 2 articles about the coronavirus impacts on businesses and how lean can and how lean might be changing. So please take a look at his blog on bobemiliani.com. Before we get into the questions, Bob, would you like to say anything to introducing?
I think just a little bit about my industry background or my education. All 3 of my degrees are in engineering, and when I first went into industry, I was employed as a materials engineer, metallurgist, and I did that kind of work for 7 or 8 years, and then I moved on to manufacturing to become a business unit manager, and then on to supply chain management. So in the 15 years that I was in industry, I was in 3 different areas: engineering, manufacturing, and supply chain management. And so those were, formative experiences, going from engineering, which is really somewhat of the ivory tower in an organization, to manufacturing, where you had to feed an assembly floor, and same thing with supply chain management. So those were transformative experiences, and of course you really learn about the real world and what's going on there. And that's where it was in manufacturing where I first was taught Toyota Production System by the Shingijutsu consultants back in 1994. And just to sum up, it was a completely eye-opening experience. And so I briefly, the thing that I noticed was how my peers were reacting and responding to this TPS training, and some were embracing it and leading in a different way, and others were not and leading in the same old way. So when I left industry, I took up lean leadership as an area of study based on what I had experienced in industry. And so for about the first 12 years, I was focused on describing what is a lean leader and how do you lead a lean organization and so on. But then in the subsequent 12 years or so, I've been looking at why don't leaders share the same interest and enthusiasm for lean that I and others do. And so that work is culminating in the book Triumph of Classical Management, and 2 others that I quickly popped out, one in January and one this month. So, so I wanted to unravel that mystery. It's been on my mind since the late 90s, early 2000s of why leaders don't flock to lean. And it's taken an enormous amount of effort over the years to figure that out. So anyway, so that fills it in.
Yeah, fantastic. We're going to move on to the questions now.
Okay.
And the first question by Chris Alcock. Chris, perhaps you'd like to read your own question there.
Actually, I've this question is, I shared this in a WhatsApp group, a very similar question a couple of days ago, and you recommended I put it onto LinkedIn, John.
Yeah.
Really, my question is, should lean practitioners offer commentary? Should we be out there asking questions regarding the supply chain issues for personal protective equipment, and why that equipment is not reaching the front line, those people who need it most, even though there's people out there who claim there's warehouses full of it? Or in these current challenging times, is it better for us to take a back seat and really just observe, learn, watch, and keep our powder dry and not say anything for the time being?
Well, generally I would vote for the latter. I mean, this is a very confusing period. People are scrambling like mad to source these materials and get them on their loading dock. And they are very busy doing just whatever it is they need to do. And so will they listen in this complicated and chaotic environment? Perhaps they will, and maybe one should be very selective in where they offer their advice to help improve or overcome the supply chain problems for personal protective equipment. But there is no doubt that it's worthwhile taking notes along the way of what's happening and processing that information and learning from that, because this there'll be another pandemic in another 10 years, and it could be worse, could be less of a problem, but one way or the other, I think it's really important to learn from this event as much as we can and improve systems and processes so that they're better able to respond in difficult times. So it's a little bit of, yes, we should give some advice, but we should be selective and careful and recognize the pressure and stress that people on the front lines are experiencing. But it's also good to take a step back and observe what's going on and have a more analytical perspective, so we can reduce that knowledge to some type of improvement in practice post-pandemic.
May I ask you a question, Professor Bob?
Oh, absolutely, sure.
Have you personally been approached, given your, shall we say, high profile and reputation in continuous improvement circles, have you personally been approached by any organizations who've sought your advice about maybe how to improve the provision of the PPE to the people who need it?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
And I think it's people are scrambling. It's just an absolute mess out there. And there's all kinds of fraud, and the price of an N95 mask has gone up 4 or 5 times, and the masks that some hospitals receive don't conform to specifications that they paid for. It's just a mess.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we go to the next question, I just want to introduce Salman Mishari, who has joined the call. And could you just let us know where you were calling in from, Salman?
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm calling actually from Saudi Arabia, here, Khobar, Saudi Arabia. So that's where I am now.
Yeah, good to see you, Salman.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, the next question. And we can have, if we've got time at the end and Professor Bob agrees, we could have some follow-up questions.
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you. From Aleksander Sidorec. Can you see the question, Alexander? Would you like to?
Anyhow, I remember it by heart. I think it's basically, it was like two questions in one. I think, Professor Bob, I think you've been actually really working a lot on generating a lot of insightful material on leadership resistance to lean. And I think through my experience and experience of many other people, especially in the supply chain domain, you face it quite a lot. But do you think at a certain stage we are getting now into the moment where the lean discipline itself reached the point that it requires a bit of rethinking and adjustment to the new realities, right?
Yeah.
And the second question is also linked a bit to that. With the new generation now coming to the workforce, what do you think, right? What do you think the ways we can do, right, to interest them, be getting more engaged into lean thinking, developing lean thinking, and actually contributing to the body of knowledge of lean thinking for the future, also going in parallel how the technology is evolving and shaping the ecosystems we are operating in. Okay, thank you.
Well, I think that the intellectual foundation for lean management was built in an era of the corporate raider and wealth creation and so forth. And wealth creation, we all know, is important. But the intellectual foundation of lean was built in a pre-pandemic era, really reflecting a time of, late 1970s forward to a couple of months ago. And so I think the intellectual foundation of lean needs to be rethought and reevaluated given circumstances. Since there is no immediate vaccine for this pandemic, there will be, it'll hang around for a long time, anywhere 6, 12 to 18 months, something like that. And that being the case, there will be a lot of changes in people's habits and their sentiments and what they view as important and what's not important. And with that, there'll be some diminishment of the interest in lean. We know the leaders of large corporations in particular have been working very hard to automate processes and bring in different types of robots and other forms of automation. Currently in the US, we have something like a 13% unemployment rate, or probably go closer to 20% soon. And then, industry is headed in the direction of more automation, so needing less people. So we'll have a high unemployment rate for a very long time. It'll take a long time to work that off, and it may remain high for the foreseeable future, because in the coming 12 to 18 months, I expect large companies to install a lot of automation. So the intellectual foundation of lean needs to be rebuilt and reflective of what's happening post-pandemic. And it's not all due to the pandemic, but I think that the pandemic accelerates things like automation occurring in business. I think it's going to accelerate it quite a bit. Some things that have been, taken decades working at home, is now going to all of a sudden happen. It's not going to be lost on chief financial officers that, every square foot of office space, fully equipped is, $500 a square foot or whatever. And if somebody can work from home, why not do it?
True.
I think there's going to be a big change in that regard. One of the problems, though, with lean and anything really is the confusion that ensues. Everybody's trying to develop some sort of marketplace advantage in whatever product or service they're trying to sell. And so you see something like lean mutate into 1,000 different things, resulting in a great confusion. And on the bright side, the dilution that has occurred with lean, or the changes that have occurred with it, widen the acceptance of lean. But as acceptance gets widened, then it gets further diluted. And so you have the new generations that are coming onto a job that I think would be very confused as to what they should pay attention to. There's so much clutter pertaining to lean. You know, what's important, what's not, what should they be learning, what should they be reading, who should they be learning from.
Exactly.
This is all extremely confusing. And, you know, back in the late 80s and early 90s, it was very clear. There was basically, you know, some ex-Toyota people, Shingijutsu Kaizen consultants, so on. And, you know, there was Ono's book. There were the books produced by Productivity Press. So it was very narrow and very clear. And now it's become very confused. And I think the confusion just, you know, further dilutes things. And I mean, one thing we know for sure is leaders don't like to be confused, and really nobody does. So I think we have a big challenge to get the younger generation interested in process improvement, you know, generally, and problem solving specifically, and understanding the need to do this, not on the time scale of education, which is teacher gives you assignment, it's due next week or next month, where, you know, that's one of the odd things, by the way, about the application of lean in industry. Generally, people learn from their educational experience and when assignments are due. And so in industry, you know, you'll get an assignment, the boss will say it's due next week or 2 weeks from now, and it actually only takes a few hours to do that work. So why isn't it due a few hours from now? So the time function associated with process improvement is not understood, and that doesn't come through clearly in the books. And if I may make a side comment related to this, you know, you see people, they get together in a conference room and brainstorm ideas for improvement. And they'll spend, you know, 4 hours or all day doing that. And what we learned from our, ex-Toyota people was, you know, spend 5 minutes in the conference room, everybody come up with one idea, and then go out to the shop floor or office floor and try those 10 ideas and try them out and report back the results by 2 p.m. You know, not in 2 weeks, not in 2 months. And sure, some business problems need, you know, 2 weeks and 2 months, but most don't. It's just, that's why you see not a lot in the way of improvement. I mean, people just taking way too long.
Yeah, good point indeed.
The other thing is, I think, you know, there's a lot of praise for people who misunderstand. You know, it's a curious thing. If somebody is successful in the business of lean, then they are perceived to possess the wisdom of lean. Mm-hmm. And those two are not related. Mm-hmm. So there is a tendency to focus on the people or organizations that are successful in the business of lean, but by my judgment, oftentimes would not be imparting the requisite knowledge or mindset. Does anybody want to follow up on that or share your thoughts?
I got something to add to watching cultures embrace lean and different continuous improvement methods in the Air Force. We've shifted in the past 2 years to a much more, another I word, innovation minded culture. And what I found to be successful is innovation is much more palatable for leaders because it shows some sort of instant gadget success to a problem. But yeah, most of them don't take the time to understand the process behind that change. So that's where we've kind of married process improvement to innovation, to where in order for us to allocate money and resources to a new gadget, the current state has to be measured. And sometimes that forces managers and leaders who've never measured their process ever to do it. Right. Because we say, okay, you want to invest a certain $100,000 on a process, and in the military we're not industry. We don't spend a lot of time measuring how long things take. That's usually a great opportunity for someone that knows how to come in and help that leader make that decision. So I know for our organization, it's been extremely successful, and it's encouraged a lot of young airmen who aren't process minded but have great ideas on what's slowing their current work down.
And that, you know, that's the key, because another thing that doesn't come across in the books and so forth is, you know, just the basic thing you want is people to have ideas. You want to create an environment where people can, you know, think about their work and have an idea about how to improve it. So innovation is closely tied to idea generation. And so what we were taught, you know, decades ago was, you have an idea, you know, you see a problem, have an idea, try it out. Try out that idea immediately. So it just revolves around generating ideas and developing a, you know, constant flow of ideas through the recognition of problems and trying it out. So the PDCA cycle, which everybody knows about and is much talked about, but what you don't see is a little stopwatch associated with that PDA cycle, or a clock, you know, in the sense that this is something to cycle through rapidly. You know, go through the PDCA cycle, you know, 2 or 3 times in a day for whatever problems you encounter in your process. And you don't have to find the perfect, you know, corrective measure, but try something, make it a little bit better, and then continue on. So the ideas are just so important, and I think people lose sight of that fundamental aspect of, you know, they get wrapped up in the tools and so forth, and even through a misunderstanding of Kaizen, they don't understand the extent to which it's about idea generation and trying those ideas out.
Could I add something?
Great point.
Could I briefly add something?
Yes,
Sure.
Chris, go ahead.
Yes, I've building on what Chris and Professor Bob have said. I recently read a book called Black Box Thinking by a gentleman called Matthew Syed, and really the essence of this book is it asks us to find a willingness to embrace failure, at least to see and find the positives that exist in failure. And when we use the word failure, there's a lot of negativity around failure, and this kind of book helped create for me a shift in my mindset, where I actually, on occasions, I now actually go out of the way to actually see whether I can make something go badly, because of the learnings I gain from it. And this ties in so closely with rapid plan, do, check, act cycles.
Yeah. Yep. But the, you know, the challenge we face is in classical management, it's not okay to fail.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, Professor, could I just pick up on a point about generating ideas, please?
Please, yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, generating ideas is absolutely vital. However, what I've seen in many organizations that I've worked for, or even assisted from a coaching point of view, is that the guys will raise the ideas, but they don't get acted upon, because that too many in operations with too much putting fires out and such like, and they haven't got time, or they don't believe they've got time to act on some of these ideas. So therefore, the ideas stop getting generated, because the guys who work on the machines and on the shop floor and such like are the experts, and they keep coming up with these, and if nothing gets done, they start talking in the canteen and stuff, where it's just a waste of time. And that's a shame, and that's where I want to come from, and that's where I would also suggest, from my experience and to my colleagues, is that we may want to review and look at possibly something like a train-the-trainer style program, where we can start going to not only giving the senior leaders introduction to Lean and Six Sigma and such like, but also the line leaders and the supervisors, the middle management need to understand the benefits, because at the moment they're too busy putting fires out, and what they need to understand is that if they work smarter, not harder, they make their lives a lot easier. Now, I've demonstrated that in many a business I've been in as a leader or a supervisor and a production manager. So I think, just to back up what you said, was that we need to focus on our first line leaders, I think.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Any follow-up point, Professor Bob, on that, or should we?
Well, it's just, you know, what kills idea generation is a long time between idea and execution.
Yeah.
And so, you know, people don't contribute ideas if in the past they've experienced, had a good idea for doing something and the boss was indifferent to it, the boss got wrapped up in firefighting and so forth. There is, you know, it is important to, as you say, the frontline supervisors, but there's a sort of chain of sentiment and perspective that flows from the CEO down to the frontline supervisor. And the frontline supervisor knows that if, you know, creating, having ideas and improving processes is not something on the CEO's mind, if they're more output focused, then the supervisor is going to focus on ensuring the output. And of course, we have a lot of metrics in place to do exactly that. So I understand what you're saying about the frontline supervisor, but you know, they are a weak reflection of the CEO. As you go up the chain of command, you get stronger reflections of the CEO. Middle management is a stronger reflection of the CEO's mindset, sentiments, and interests compared to a supervisor, and so forth on up the chain.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we'll move on to the next question. Alex, that's okay with Alex?
That's good, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, great. All right, sorry, this way. Okay, Jimmy, this was your question, and you did touch upon this already.
So my question is how do we assist that VP and you know, and sort of go on the cultural change?
Yeah, thank you, thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I experienced the same thing in my business unit, and I don't think firing people is a good idea, because what you're seeing in people who are not motivated to get with the program, that is a problem. This is an opportunity to do some problem solving. It is an opportunity to understand the root cause of whatever the problem is, of why they're not motivated to get with the program, as you put it. If you fire somebody, you're just doing what, you know, the easiest thing possible to do. You don't learn anything from that. The next people that you hire to replace them might be similarly not motivated. So what do? Fire them too. The next people that come in, they're not motivated. You fire them too. So if you go through the effort to understand the root cause of the problem and talk to them and dig down deep into the layers of what they're saying, then you find out that the concerns that they have are going to be the same concerns that many other people have, but those many other people don't necessarily express that concern. And so by uncovering or doing some problem solving here, you uncover the root of the problem, and that's going to be in the minds of other people. And then you, of course, address it with whatever ameliorative measures, and you know, you make improvement. Now, there is the occasional person who, no matter what you do, is just not going to budge, and you know, there's likely some point at which the problem solving is no longer producing a useful result, and you may have to part ways. But on the other hand, companies that have been very successful with lean, the people who don't like doing their work that way or thinking in a lean way, they don't like that environment because they're so used to classical management, they usually end up leaving on their own to find some other company where they're, you know, more comfortable with the status quo, the old way of doing things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I always found it very beneficial, and yet it's not always solved in one conversation as to what the real concern is. You know, the classic example is in an all-employee meeting, somebody will raise their hand and say, you know, is there going to be a layoff? And of course, the bosses, you know, they usually don't like to get that question, but it has a deeper meaning, and the deeper meaning is something like, well, my son or daughter is going to college, and they're considering some choices, and you know, one choice costs, just pick a number here, you know, $5,000 a year, and another one here costs $30,000 a year. And if I don't have a job, I can't pay for the 30,000. So there's something deeper that's going on here, and I've tried to expose that stuff in the triumph of classical management, at least as it pertains to top leaders.
Thank you.
Bob, I have a question to you, expanding the idea and the topic that Jimmy is sharing. So, as continuing the things evolved over the past 15, 20 years, and we got the new corporate culture stepping in, right? So when we talk about these startups and unicorns that came to the market, right, and some of them operating in the mindset of more flat organizations, right, and basically self-directed teams. So do you think then the problem of the classical management is diminishing?
No, because if those startups are successful, I mean, we see it in the technology world. Certain technology businesses, which will remain nameless, but you all know very well when you are looking something up on the internet, they grow to a large size, and then the sort of bureaucracy fills in, and they start to place certain rules and limits on what employees can go do, and they start to therefore kill the ideas and creativity and so on. It's certainly not at the rate it once was when they were smaller. So classical management is ubiquitous, and it creeps into organizations as they grow larger. You're right that the small entrepreneurial business are more lean-minded. They may not really understand the concepts and so forth, but they understand that they have to react and respond quickly to changes in demand or changes in customer needs and so forth, and have to basically eliminate the queue time and whatever the process is in order to get from beginning to end. And then in a bureaucratic organization, of course, loads in lots of queue time between each step, because they become more concerned about the appearance of if they make a mistake, what the appearance of that is, rather than understanding what their customers want and serve them rapidly.
Is it the problem that, do you see the significant shift happening when the business goes from the private hands into the IPO and becomes public company?
Well, that's part of it, but I don't think, not necessarily. So, I mean, I used to, when I was in supply chain management job, I was responsible for a commodity of parts that we called small machine parts, and it was $110 million worth of stuff that we bought every year. And all of my 60 suppliers were small family-owned businesses. So basically, less than 100 people, between 20 and 100 people. And you saw lots of, bureaucracy and resistance there amongst that leadership team. And they were all, at that time, 100% privately owned. And we were embarking on an effort to help these owners understand lean management and why they needed to do quick changeover and improve their flexibility and responsiveness to changing market conditions and so on and so on. And, there was enormous resistance to that.
Thank you, Bob.
Yep.
Thank you very much, Bob. Very good. So,
on that,
Jimmy, you okay with that? Any?
No,
can I say something?
Fine.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Okay, we're going to move on to the next question, which is my question.
So, sorry, John. Can I say something on the?
You certainly can. Kola.
I was just looking at this. This is a part that I've dealt with before, and in fact, I did write a book on it. Which could you just mention the book? Just give a plug for the book. Yeah, I think I need to represent the book, but it's going to be it's called Effective Communication to the Route to Desired Results.
Okay, very good.
And what that book was also looking at was, sorry, it wasn't effective. Effective change. Sorry, effective change. The route to desired results. And one of the things we're looking at in that book was where you're coming up with a change, you're looking at two key types of people: acceptors of change and resistors of change. And a lot of times we spend so much time with resistors of change, whereby when they say anything to you, you're mulling over it, you're thinking about it, how am I going to defend myself to these people, etc., 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 and they're sapping your energy, rather than a lot of focus on those who actually are your cheerleaders and giving them more work and encouraging them. They'll see you in the morning, they'll say, oh, I was thinking about things. You say, oh yeah, thumbs up, you leave them and let them go. But you need to encourage them. Whereas the one that resists you, you're thinking of ways to counter, etc., etc. So if we have someone who is leading an organization and has got people that are resisting, one of the key things to be thinking of is, okay, how do we engage them? Then you're thinking, if they're not on board,
yeah,
you got to think about how you're going to let them go, but being very, very careful and thinking others are watching.
No, it's good. I like your point. I hear your points, Kola. There's some very strong arguments for actually removing the people that are the bad influences that are taking the energy and the time. But Bob, how do you address those arguments when people make a strong argument that you get rid of the people that are taking up all this energy?
Well, I mean, it seems part of the problem is that these resistors are our role models to some degree, and I include that in top leaders, because leaders say certain things about, you know, improvement and making progress and so forth, but when you peel back the onion, you find there's a whole lot of resistance. You know, that the reality of the situation is that there's a whole lot of resistance. So one thing is said, but something different is done. And so we really need to think about who are our role models, who are the leaders we should be following versus the ones that we have been following.
Good, thank you.
I think from my point of view, there's just no particular general rule that almost like deals with it, but it depends on case by case. I think.
Yes, I agree with that, Cole. I like that last statement about case by case, because while everybody was talking there, I was thinking and thought, during my time working in one business, I was given a leash, if you like, to get on and do what I needed to do, and people just left me alone because my area was getting under control, and it wasn't too much of a problem area, so the senior or middle management went elsewhere. So I was able to just get on with it. And the point I'm trying to make is that facts and data proved through the success of our production area. I say our because it wasn't all down to me, it was a team effort. Facts and data and through visual management and such like that proved that those ideas worked. So therefore, senior management then sort of come to us and said, well, hold on, what are you doing slightly different than other areas? So I hear what we're all saying about the senior management and Professor, you're absolutely so right about some of these people are role models. But if we can put successes on the plate, some of these people's got nowhere to go, and they've got to come along to the party, and that allows other people who are passionate about the program can make decisions about these people who isn't coming to the party. Hope that's okay.
Yeah,
well,
thank
yeah,
you, Jimmy. Yeah.
I would just qualify that a little bit by saying facts and data can prove, but if you know, our empirical evidence shows that in a lot of organizations, the facts and data end up showing somebody to be poorly managing or poorly leading, and those facts and data get buried in favor of the status quo. Lean would be much further along if it were merely a matter of facts and data making the case.
Right, great, thank you. Let's move to the next question now. And the next question is my question. One of the the favorite books that you've published, Professor, is this Principles of Mass Flow and Production, Mass and Flow Production. And for those that don't know it, it's based on the work of Frank Woolard, who was the senior engineer at Morris Motors before the Second World War. And what Professor Bob discovered was that Frank Woolard implemented many principles and tools and techniques that we would associate with lean production today, back in the 1930s. 1920s, yes, thank you. So the question would be that, you know, was that your conclusion that you agree with that they understood lean principles? And if so, which areas did they not understand or not follow through with?
Well, Frank Woolard was in charge of the engine shop, and in that shop, he by basically developing a Toyota production system, and apparently minus Kanban, it's not clear there, but having almost all the other elements in place, he was able to dramatically improve the output of engines, which are the pacing item in automobile production, so that Morris Motors could sell to much larger market and grow market share, sell many more vehicles and grow market share. So what he had done in the engine shop did not necessarily transfer over to the rest of Morris Motors or its suppliers. And Leonard Lord was in charge of assembly. And Leonard Lord basically, well, the engines were delivered in time. There was, mountains of inventory of all the other parts. And so I don't think that the UK automotive industry really caught hold of this. I think the answer is no, they didn't really begin to understand those lean principles. Now, but that being said, in World War II, the emergency situation that creates, just like with the pandemic now, you have to get rid of the queue time between steps in a process. You have an emergency. So wartime munitions were, are producing something close to a flow, the bombers that were built and so forth. And the same thing happened, by the way, with Woolard in the World War I. He was a remarkably talented guy, people aren't going to like that I say this, but if you compare Woolard's resume to Taiichi Ohno, Woolard has a much, much, much fuller resume. He was a designer of difficult parts, transmissions, gears, that's, you have to be quite on the ball to be able to do that. Anyway, there was a certain tank, I forgot the name of the model, in World War I, the gearbox was failing, and that was leading to, the tanks can't move, they're sitting ducks, and the tank personnel gets killed and so on. And so Woolard was put on the task of fixing the gearbox and so on. And so he has, patents in designing parts, patents in designing, flow equipment for flow production. I mean, quite a remarkable range of talent. And this gentleman got lost to history because he published his works in journals that were related to materials handling, as opposed to production journals and so forth. And so the materials handling is a more narrow audience than production. But it's just remarkable work that he did. And I came across his book. I was for years trying to find a book called, I think it was called The Motor Industry, written by a couple of economists, which was said to have really influenced Toyota's thinking regarding this plant size, what the output of a given automotive plant should be. Anyway, I located it one day. I don't know why it was such a struggle, but anyway, I got that book. And in that book, they referred to Woolard and flow production in one or two sentences. And when I saw those two sentences, I was like, what is this? I never heard of this. And make it my business to scour the world for information about this sort of thing. And I've never heard of it before. And so I managed to locate original copies of Woolard's book in the mid-2000s, 2005-06 timeframe. And then I had a wonderful colleague, Peter Seymour in England, and we worked together to, I took a couple of trips to Birmingham to talk to Woolard's 92-year-old protege, who passed away shortly after my visit, and researched the archives in the Birmingham Library, as well as personal archives by Woolard's protege and so forth. And anyway, it's just a remarkable story, and you know, as so often happens, you know, great work just sort of goes fallow and people forget about it. And I was very proud in working with my colleague Peter Seymour to bring his work back to the forefront. One problem is, of course, this, you know, his work was a long time ago, and so people don't have much of an appreciation for brilliant work done in the past and brilliant historical figures and so on. And it's unfortunate. All I can say. It's just it's a pity. But Woolard was a brilliant guy.
And is there anything about what the UK were doing, the USA were doing, and Germany were doing at the time that would not have led to something like TPS if they hadn't been involved in the war and things got messed up there?
You know, it just seems like in wartime, everybody suddenly figures that it's a good idea to get rid of the queue time. And then when the war, you know, when the emergency ends, everybody's like, let's go back to normal. Mm-hmm. And part of this is the artifact of classical management, where you have to have certain, you know, management and financial controls on a business, which builds in a lot of over-inspection and queue time. I imagine, I mean, where I used to live in Hartford, Connecticut was a wonderful industrialized area starting in the late, I guess actually in the more like the mid 1800s or something. I mean, they made armaments. The Colt Firearms Factory made armaments for the Civil War. So yeah, it's mid 1800s or something. Plus, the loom business began actually here in Rhode Island in Slater Mill. Fellow came over from England with the designs of the looms memorized so he could avoid the British patents, and created Slater Mill. And anyway, so the Northeast United States is, I am sure that there's examples of flow production in you know, the US, UK, wherever, in all countries around the world, but they're not documented. You know, these things happen in the past. They gave somebody some sort of advantage in the marketplace, and they, you know, kept it a secret or didn't see a reason to write about it, and so on. So, you know, we keep sort of rediscovering what we should instead be doing all along.
Thank you very much.
I mean, just by way of example, you know, when I was in the supply chain management, we had contracts with suppliers, multi-million-dollar contracts, and it was terrible. There was something like 14 signatures required on this contract. And when you put it through the signature cycle, it just sat on everybody's desk because nobody wants to read a contract and so forth. But when you walk that contract through, go knock on the doors individually of all 14 people, you know, you get it done in a day. But if you just let it go through the normal process, it takes 3 months to get all those signatures. So get rid of the queue time and you get a result.
Fascinating. Thank you very much for answering that.
Sure.
The next question is Chris Alcock. I like this question a lot. Could you just talk us through it, please, Chris?
Yes, I will do. I came across a term VUCA a number of years ago now, and VUCA is short for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And curiously enough, I'm giving training courses to British Armed Forces service leavers. I've been doing so for the past couple of years. And these guys are very talented at dealing with situations with a lot of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Very, very talented indeed. And I'm actually giving them training courses on Lean Six Sigma, and some of them are doing very well and some of them really struggle with it. And really, at the present time, we've got a lot of VUCA in the world. I think we all know that. And really, the question comes out of that, well, if there's so much volatility in the world at the present time, why bother thinking about processes? Why not just use kind of our ability to deal with rapidly changing situations and throw away textbooks regarding Lean?
Yeah, this is part of the widespread confusion and misunderstanding about it being process focused, because it's not just being process focused, but the result of being process focused is flexibility, adaptability, creativity, and innovation, all of which applies in a VUCA world. So we know from experience, these aren't theoretical conceptions, that the companies that do well in their process improvement activity have greater flexibility and adaptability, and they've developed a workforce that is more innovative and creative and can respond rapidly to changing conditions. People work together better as a team because they're not blamed for problems. And it's okay to fail in their efforts, and so they can very rapidly respond to whatever the challenge at hand happens to be. And you're seeing some of that with COVID-19. Some of you may remember an American TV show called MacGyver, where this guy ran into a problem and he, fixed it by assembling, various found items to help deal with the issue. Same thing with one of those Apollo flights, 13 or whatever, where they had the oxygen tank blow and they had to, work together to produce some sort of way of saving themselves and do so rapidly, et cetera. And there was a ground crew in Houston saying, well, here's what's in the capsule. We got to figure out how to assemble these items and transmit this information to the three people in the capsule so they can survive. So I think that, Lean is and so forth is wonderful for a VUCA world. But, people are so deeply scripted in the, traditional way of doing things and having to get permission to do something because they're afraid of getting blamed and so on, it's just, it doesn't come to the forefront as it should. How about others? How would you, respond to that if somebody said, what's the point of process-focused approach when things are changing daily?
One of the things that I'm more and more beginning to describe Lean as team-based problem solving, rather than process improvement, service improvement. And when I call it team-based problem solving, people say, well, yeah, I think I'm pretty good at team-based problem solving, but I guess we can all become better. And then it's an opportunity to start a conversation about what Lean can teach us about team-based problem solving, and also numerical evidence-based problem solving, which then takes us more in the Six Sigma direction. And nobody is ever going to say we need less team-based problem solving. Nobody's ever going to say that. There are people who will say we should spend less time focused on improving processes.
That's true. They will say that. We don't have time to improve the process.
Yes, so less time improving processes because the process is going to be outdated tomorrow anyway. So why bother improving it today?
But we always confront this barrier, which again is what Triumph of Classical Management and the other two books are trying to talk about, is a current state value stream map, which shows batch and queue processing and all these queues and delays and buildup of inventories and so forth. This is a visual representation of what the leaders of the company have thought to be the best way to go about satisfying customer demand, right? And that's what a current state value stream map shows. And in the past, when I showed that to leaders, they would say, well, I had no idea about this. And I had no idea it was this many people. I had no idea it was this much inventory. I had no idea it took this long. And the way I was trained by, you know, our Kaizen consultants was like, you're a bad manager if you have no idea about these things. You're hurting your people, you are hurting your customers, you're hurting your investors, you're hurting your suppliers. You know, our old sensei would say, you should be fired. So, you know, some leaders are like, okay, I acknowledge the fact that we have been managing poorly, and so let's move forward and make necessary changes. But other leaders see a current state value stream map, and they view that as an affront to their knowledge, to their leadership, to themselves personally. And obviously, to make progress in an organization, you cannot have that reaction.
Can I say something?
Please.
Go ahead, go.
I've been confronted with this question as well, and what I generally tend to do, and I'll probably even point into a simple tool as just doing a simple flow chart, or doing however way you do it, streamline, whatever. When you've got your decision diamond, it's already asking you, if it doesn't go the normal way, so what should we do? That's where we're saying, okay, maybe we should approach somebody who is going to make a decision or whatever it is. So I keep saying that, well, I mean, if your business is threatened, then what's your business continuity plan? That's the worst case scenario in that. What's your business continuity plan? Where things have shaken things. If there's a process in that, well, that takes you further in what you want to do. That's my thinking towards that.
Mm.
Very, very good. Thank you. Thank you. Should we move on to the next question?
Sure.
Bob, after the financial crisis of 2007, 2008, did you see a decline or rise in lean at that time? And what can we expect after the pandemic? Will people be going to lean for improvement, for making things better, or will there be, I think one of your points is they might just go to technology. How do you see the next next 10 years compared to the previous 10 years?
Well, I think there was renewed interest in lean and starting around 2008, because after a 7-year delay, Toyota produced their Toyota Way 2001 document where they highlighted the two pillars: continuous improvement and respect for people. And by the way, those two pillars go back in time. Woolard talked about it in a different language, but he had the same idea, and so did Fred Taylor, going back to the early 1900s. So this idea of continuous improvement and respect for people has been part of progressive management for over 100 years, but somehow was not part of lean until about 2008. Mm-hmm. And so there was renewed interest because people were realizing focusing on continuous improvement alone wasn't getting you there. And so, as I said, after a long delay, people around 2008 started to highlight the importance of respect for people, and folks thought that would give lean, a boost that would help it gain greater acceptance. With not realizing, of course, that in classical management, respect for people is not something of interest, and so I think lean has struggled in the last few years. I think that the pandemic, post-pandemic, as I said earlier, lean needs a new foundation. The one it was built on is no longer right for the times. And then technology will certainly move things in a direction that would be requiring less of lean. Now, let me qualify that by saying lean and technology can go very nicely hand in hand. And they're,
Sure.
you know, you see what Toyota is doing and how they're using automation to do things that are bad for human health. They're hazardous. It's hazardous work. They're using automation in ways that complement human creativity and ingenuity. And it's not so much it's not a race to replace people. But in classical management, it is a race to replace people with automation. And so, so I expect, hope I'm wrong, but you know, expect to see a decline in interest in lean going forward, at least as it has been constructed in the past. And one of my great concerns, and the reason why I spent 12 years trying to understand why most leaders are disinterested or why they reject or resist lean management. I've been interested in this subject because I feel like people have been going into battle, so to speak, you know, trying to advance lean, not knowing what they're up against. And we've all run into significant barriers that exist not just at the top of the organization, but also there isn't much buy-in for lean at the bottom of the organization. Most of the buy-in for lean is in the professional salaried staff of an organization. And even there, it's not complete, but that's where you would tend to find most of the buy-in. And the leaders are not bought in because you know, they have it pretty good, so why change? And the people on the bottom are in a tenuous position, hanging on by their fingernails. They're not real interested in changing either because they may slip off into something worse consequence in life than a low-paying job, something worse, like a no-paying job. So we have failed to understand the sentiments, the motivations, the interests, and so forth of the folks at the top, as well as the folks down below, the good people actually doing the work, the people at the Gemba. So my focus has been on the people at the top, but there also needs to be a better understanding of why the people who are doing the actual work are not so interested in lean either. That said, we know that the leadership sets the tone, and if leaders were engaged with lean, that the people on the Gemba would follow suit. Everybody would. If it's led properly, people follow the leader. If it's not led, they don't. So I think it's critically important to understand what you're up against, and the more knowledge you have, the better you can formulate your ideas and decision-making on how to you know, deal with the constraints at hand.
Mm. Very good. Are you following any particular organization that we won't have heard of, or that you want to share with us, or that's either educating people in a different way, or are by their actions showing that this works? Who are you putting up as role models right now, or who are you following?
That's a good question.
You're at the top. It's hard to.
Well,
respecting for their work.
Well, a lot of my inspiration comes from going way back in time.
Yeah.
And looking at, so 100 or more years ago, perceptive people were able to comprehend what was going on because the overall situation was simpler. And if you go back and read what they wrote, they help one declutter current times so you can see the forest through the trees. And so
you like to learn from F.W. Taylor, for example.
Well, and others.
Yeah.
Could
you throw out a few names for us that we might not have be so familiar? Or?
Well, somebody that I've been looking a lot. Well, I've had to immerse myself into the social sciences in order to unravel what this problem is.
Social sciences, yeah, very interesting.
Well, so my background is all engineering. All my degrees are in engineering, but to understand why lean is not of great interest to leaders, I've had to dig into economics, and so the various social sciences, political science, and so on, to figure out what's going on. So, as I said, it's been about a dozen years and a lot of effort.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
I think there's another question, isn't there?
I put the other question in at number 2. That was Alex's question. So
was there Paul Allen had a question?
Oh, Paul Allen. I'm sorry, Paul couldn't make the talk today, but I must have sent that, and I haven't put it on the slides, I'm afraid.
Well, his question was, not including Toyota and some others, of exemplary UK company.
That's right.
And that's really not something I keep track of, is who's exemplary in their practice of lean. I used to, but that's probably 18 years ago or so, because it changes. There's changes in ownership, changes in management, and that changes how well or not well a company is doing with lean. So I don't really keep track of that, so it's difficult for me to say. I know there's one thing I do know, though, is when I visit companies, I don't see much. I see huddle boards and other things like that, and some visuals and so forth, but I rarely see material or information flow.
No, that's correct.
And
yeah,
so
thank you.
My take on it, there's a lot of hype in terms of success, but I don't see much in the way of just in time.
Can I ask a question, please?
Sure.
Hello, Salman. Yes.
Hi. Yeah. After this crisis and what we've seen of business interruption and disruption and so on, do you think there will be more focus on business continuity, business impact analysis? Would you think the clients will demand that their suppliers will actually do ISO 22301 or 22317, like business impact analysis and so on? Because I've seen, some CEOs saying that if we just, planned for something like this, we could have probably, saved a lot of things, if we just had a better plan before this incident.
What has happened over the last 20 years is making long supply lines, lengthening supply lines in search of lower unit cost of a part, lower labor costs, and so forth. And what this pandemic is showing is the queue time that's built in by having long supply lines is not acceptable in an emergency situation. So there might be more business continuity planning. I would expect some of that to occur. Maybe a lot of that will occur, but I would also hope and expect to see a shortening of supply lines, because if you want just in time, just in time is getting hammered in the press for being the reason why the supply is all messed up. But just about, every business has 3 months worth of inventory, and that's not just in time, on average 3 months. So supply lines need to be shortened, certainly for critical items. And, if you sell in a given market, it makes sense to go produce there, but it doesn't make sense to produce in that market and then distribute globally. There's too much transportation time, there's too much pollution, there's too much cost, and so on. People are thinking always in terms of unit costs or labor hour costs instead of total costs. And they really need to shift towards total cost. Flow is the lowest way to produce something on a total cost basis. And batch and queue is lowest on a unit cost basis. Or so it appears by the accounting methods.
I thought that was a great answer. Thank you. Thank you. And thanks for that point, Salman.
Thank you.
So being a lean team, we want to be on time, right? So we've got 2 minutes left. And I just want to again, tell people about Bob Emiliani's website, bobemiliani.com, and also mention about the organization most of us are members of, which is ILSSI.org. But apart from that, what time is it there, Bob? You've got a full day ahead of you. Have you got some more conference calls?
Yes, I actually have one at 10 a.m.
Okay, so we're going to have to wrap up, I'm afraid, and thank Bob greatly for his time and all of his leadership, not just on this call, but all the things he does for the Lean community every day, all the blogs, all the coaching he does. We've all benefited from it, and I always tell people about Bob in all my classes.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm happy to have joined you today. I hope it was worthwhile.
Certainly.
Thank you, Bob.
It was good.
It sure was. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bob. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Stay healthy.
Bye-bye. See you later.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Goodbye, John.
Bye-bye.
Adios.
Adios. Yeah,
Adios.
Miguel.
مع السلامة.